Alright, so now we're going to get over here to step 2, which is going to be addressing the piston rings. We've got the cam bearings installed. You're going to have to get a grinding tool or a file. This one here, I'll put all this stuff in the description. But you get your ring set out, and then you're going to get your top ring. It's going to say top ring on your instructions here. This is a plasma moly ring, and it's got a dot. The dot's going to face up. When you put this onto the grinding tool, it's got 2 little tabs here. You hold it firm, and you always turn towards you in a counterclockwise fashion, because if you go forward with it like you normally grind something, it can chip off the plasma moly that's on the outer edge of this ring. So anyway, the whole grinding method that you start here, before you get into that, you've got to take your ring and then bring it over to your actual cylinder that you're going to set up, because each ring is going to be ground for each cylinder based on that piston and the bore, and it stays with that piston and that bore for the entire grinding for the ring gap clearance. This one has one in here already that I set up, but you would just take this here, set it in this way, flip it around. You can get tools. You're just going to place it in the hole just a little bit, but I always use a piston. I put a second ring on the piston in the second oil ring groove, and this just becomes my makeshift tool. I just drop this down into the bore, and then once I slide it down until it stops, it's going to stay flat and square with the ring on the second land. And then you can take your feeler gauge and you can stick it inside. The feeler gauge goes into the ring gap on the inside here to try to check your gap. I'll have to zoom in closer and we'll look at that here after a second, but I wanted to get back into just a little brief setup here on doing the grinding. I'm going to put it into here. I usually I count my turns when I start coming back. The first one I did probably took about 30. But you know, if you're doing it for the first time, you just gotta go slow, take your time. You have to get a file here, and you always take the deburring off of the edge towards you, and that's going to take off little fine burrs that's going to be there from the grinding. And then again, you just come over here, stick it into the bore that you're working with, and then get your piston tool and set this up into the bore, and then press it down into the bore. And then once you have that, you can get your gauge and then check the distance. So I'll zoom in here and we can look at what we're looking at for the actual gap. Okay, so I've zoomed in here to the actual bore here. This is our first ring. That's our top oil ring. And this is one that I already did earlier, but you know, you're going to take a feeler gauge and you're going to stick it down into the groove that's between the 2 openings of the ringland. Let's say I just put this one here. It should stay there because it's pretty snug. And this is where I filed this one down, and this one here is at 28 thousandths. The second oil ring groove, which is going to go into this cylinder for this, but I just kind of set it up there. You know, when you before you do any grinding, see what you're working with. So this is inside the bore, and I'm going to take this one here. This is this one here. I remember it was about almost 25. So I'm sticking this inside there to the gap there, and that's a tight, super tight 25 thousandths. Well, that'll be the starting point for the second oil ring, depending on what you want for your difference in your gap. And you're just going to continue to go slow with that process, and I'll try to zoom in just a little more maybe. And you can see here how you're going to stick your feeler gauges inside there. Just this little gap between the 2, and you can see the dot here I was talking about is right right there in front of the gauge. There's that dot. That's where it's up. And then I just stick this gauge in here. You can see the gauge going in there snug. And then you look at your, what it says is 25 thousandths. Same thing for the other side on the top ring.